Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and fabric is like a musician. We can create many, many things with fabric. We can even create an illusion. And this fabric from Camelot gave me that same feeling of an illusion. All of these blocks have an illusion that they're either coming in or the blocks are pointing out. So I want to take this fabric and turn it into a quilt with a lot of illusions. So I'm going to start with this main focal fabric, pull in those solids, and then for a border, I'm going to add another illusion fabric. The quilt is going to consist of regular squares, half square triangles, and some diamonds. So just for the diamond points, I am going to use a paper piecing method. And that way it's going to keep all of my angles and my points sharp. However, I'm not actually going to stitch on this paper. I'm just using the paper to get my points. In the description, I will put a couple of PDFs. This one will give us our cutting directions. The two blues that I've chosen are going to be cut the same. We do have binding and the outside border. And this is all we're going to need for this quilt. We are going to need to make 9 blocks that look like this. We have half square triangles in the corner, a lot of square pieces, and then these little arms. And those little points or those little arms are going to look like this. So we have that red on the bottom of each, and then 2 we're going to have dark blue and 2 light blue. So we have the reds, the light blues, and the dark blues. For the entire quilt, we are going to need 18 of the dark and 18 of the light blue. I'll also put in the description a PDF that you can print out so we can do some paper piecing. In the pattern, I have 2 that do not have the extensions. And this is just going to give you a choice. Do you like those lines, or do you rather not have the lines? If you do like the arms, then make 1 copy of this. Draw the extensions, and then photocopy this on your paper. And that way they're all going to be there. So to make these blocks, we're going to need 72 pieces of this paper. That will match the E, which will match the red C's, and the 2 blue D's. Now, if you don't like paper piecing, there is a way we can still use this paper to get that precision, but not stitch on the paper. This is a tip that I like to use when they are simpler patterns. I'm using the paper, but I'm not stitching on the paper like traditional paper piecing. Now, my solid fabrics look good from both sides, so I don't have to worry about a right and a wrong side, and that's also going to speed things up. So I'm going to take this fabric piece and put it onto the back of the pattern. Put 1 line of glue down the center, and we really are not going to need a lot. And I'm going to put that on. Now we can pin it, but I do find pins can get in the way, so this is a great way to start. So I have that paper on my fabric. Now this would be the right side of the fabric if you do have a fabric that is not good from both sides. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take one side and fold it. I like to just use a very thin piece of template plastic. You can use cardstock, anything along that line. And I'm going to fold right along that one line. And this is where that extra line would be, folding it right along that line. This line is a stitching line, so I'm going to need to leave myself a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I can take any ruler, have myself a 1/4 inch seam allowance, line it up along that paper edge, and trim it off. So you can see where I now have that 1/4 inch seam allowance. You can also get a special ruler that's going to give us a perfect 1/4 inch. You can get different sizes, But what it does have is a little lip, and this is a 1/4 inch. So it fits perfect along that paper edge, and it gives us that 1/4 inch. So if you have the add a 1/4, you can use that. If not, you can use any ruler that's going to give us that 1/4 inch. We now are going to be able to add on these little corners. So if I line this up right along that edge, normally we would fold the paper back and stitch right along that line. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to pull that paper back a little bit, and I'm going to use the edge of the foot and do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. My seams already match up, so I don't really need to follow this line. So I'm going to pull that back and stitch. So I have that stitched on. If I fold that back, I can see that it's going to follow those lines. And that's where this piece might come in handy if you do want to check your piece. From here, I'm going to press this right to the back. So I have that first piece on. I need to add that second piece so that I can make that point. I'm going to turn this over. That piece right there, I'm going to fold back. I'm folding right along that stitch line, and I'm trimming a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to be able to take my next red and match up that seam. Traditionally, once again, we would fold that down, stitch along that line. But I'm just going to pull it back a little bit and stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once that seam is done, press that over. When you are pressing, be sure to use a dry iron, and that way it won't wrinkle the paper. I now have that one point done. I need to do the second point. Turn it over, flip that paper right along that edge. I'm not worried about that red. I'll trim it off later. Trim that off. And now I'm going to start adding those blues. This paper really is just going to give you a good guide on where things are going to go. Match up that edge. Just roll that paper back and stitch. That seam's been done. We can take that fabric and we can see that all of that paper is covered, and that's what we're looking for. We get to do that one more point. Line up, fold back, trim off the 1/4 inch. I can use that as a guide. Match up those seams, roll that paper back, stitch. Press that last seam over. So from the front side, we have this funny looking piece, but when we turn it over, we do have those trim lines. And we're trimming on this very outside line. This is the stitching line when we do put the quilt together. So that is that 1/4 inch seam allowance. We now can trim that block right along that edge. And when it's trimmed, we have that perfect block on both sides. This is remaining 3 inches by 5.5 inches. Now if this was paper pieced and we stitched through the paper, we would have to remove the paper. Well, we still need to remove the paper, but it's very easy to remove that paper now. And you might be able to use this piece a couple of times. So this is sort of paper piecing without stitching on the paper. We need to do nothing with B on any of those 3 colors, but we will need to make half square triangles out of the 2 A's. To make the half square triangles, I will be matching up those blocks. Draw a line from corner to corner and stitch a scant 1/4 inch on each side. Then trim it apart on that line. When we open it up, we have 2 half square triangles from those 2 squares. And these will need to be trimmed down to 3 inches. So we're going to have 3-inch squares, 3-inch half square triangles, and our little diamonds are 3 inches by 5.5 inches. Once our half square triangles are done, we're going to be able to put our block together. Take 4 aside and put them with that border fabric. Now let's make our 9 blocks. Divide that main focal fabric into sections of 9. So we're going to have 9 in the center and 9 4 corners. Divide up our half square triangles, and just for now, let's place them on the corners. We're going to be able to take those triangular points, divide that pile in half, and with the red facing in, we're going to put that dark blue on one side and the light blue on the other side. So that's giving us that nice big star. From here, we're going to be able to adjust these half square triangles. We have a light block, so we're going to need some light squares on that side, and the same with this side. So we're going to be able to make sure that the light half square triangle section is facing the light on these diamonds. And once we've adjusted those, the darks are going to face together. Divide up those blocks. When we've laid this out, you should be able to see a very definite 45-degree angle on those corners. So we have darks and lights. The easiest way to sew these together is now by corners. So we're going to sew these 4 blocks together. This corner and that corner are the same, and these two will be the same. Once I have those corners done, we're going to be able to sew this in sections. These will match up, and this little point will match up right there on those seams. Once those 9 blocks are done, we're going to be able to sew them together. We're going to have 3 rows with 3 blocks in each row. When we do sew them together, we are going to match a light blue and a dark blue. And that's going to really continue the illusion of depth. Now we did cut a border fabric. It was 3 inches by 38 inches. And we have 4 half square triangles left over. So we're going to be able to add those on. What we will need to do when we put on these half square triangles is to maintain the light dark that we have been doing throughout. So we have that light and dark joining up here, so it gives us a point. And we're going to be able to continue that on the corners. So where I have light, I'm going to be adding that dark. That half square triangle really does finish that illusion. Now I will be adding a red binding on it. That red binding is going to showcase this red fabric more. If I was to add a gold binding, it would emphasize the gold more. And that goes the same with the 2 blues. Whatever color you choose for that binding will bring out the color in the quilt. So because I want those red stars to really pop, I'm going to add on the red binding. And when that quilt top is done, it definitely looks like an optical illusion. It looks like those stars are coming out of the blocks, and that's all because of the light and dark blue and the angles. Now I did do some paper piecing for those diamonds to keep them nice and secure. And there's 2 ways you can always do that. You can stitch on the paper or use the method that I tried. I will put in the description 2 PDFs. One that's going to give us some cutting directions so we can follow along, and a template to make those paper pieces. Now this quilt was a lot of fun. It was fun to see that illusional fabric come together, and it was all inspired from the fabric called Illusions. I do hope you enjoyed today's episode, and thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and I do have a newsletter, all under Sew Very Easy. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.